Today we are going to continue with the demonstration of procedures done in Lab 2. You know that in Lab 2 is the most expanded lab procedure because multiple steps are done in it. So last time, in the last lab session, you have done your wax up on secondary casts. These secondary casts were duplicated, and now you have received in this lab, these are called refractory casts. And these are the ones ready to go for the casting process. Before doing the casting process, we have to design the metal framework that we're going to utilize. So this design is done by wax. So actually, the same cast, we begin adding wax components that now will represent the metal framework. So whatever I'm adding to this cast will be actually the metal framework later on. So we're going to add these waxes in these forms, multiple components, multiple layers, and once more, because they are different purposes and have different names and structures, we're going to demonstrate them to you step by step, and then we're going to let you do the step in between after each instruction. So now we're ready to begin our work. Step 1. We're going to do what we call internal finish lines. Internal finish lines are the metal margins inside the fitting surface. So these are the metal margins from the fitting surface, and these are added usually as the first layer. And they will be in contact with the cast at the margins wherever we had relief, gauged relief. So these are usually added in these areas. So to draw them, we're going to fill in this. We are going to fill wax in these margins of the gauged relief. We're going to continue up to here. We're going to fill in the proximal. And once we fill in these angles with wax, this wax will turn into metal, and they will form the same thing, margins. And these margins are called internal finish lines. So we continue around the palatal side and then into the proximal surface as well. These are their extensions. So on the upper, these are the distal, palatal, and proximal mesial finish lines around the gauged relief. Also, we're going to fill in this box. This will become metal, and it will become a stopper here. On the bound saddle, once more, we're going to fill in the palatal, the proximal, and the proximal reaching up to the buccal side. In the lower, we're going once more to fill in this stopper. We're going to fill in the distal, lingual, and proximal outline of the gauged relief. And in the bounded saddle, we are going to fill in the proximal, lingual, and the other proximal side. One way of doing this is bringing inlay wax and melting it. And then we spread this molten wax into these grooves and margins. So we can take some of this molten inlay wax and drip it into the stopper area. Okay, and we can do the same for the upper. And after we finish the stopper, we can spread also molten wax in the margins using heat, or we can just satisfy ourselves with these fine ropes of pattern wax. So we're going to place these wax if we're going to use them. This is just to make the step easy for you as students. So add in and squeeze them. Now, refractory casts have a feature here that they are now sticky, and wax will stick to them because these were dipped in beeswax after the step of duplication. So the beeswax on their surface will help this wax stick in place just by finger pressure. So from the distal, palatal, and proximal, we have now these finish lines, and we're going to squeeze in this wax to fill in the angle. So we're using finger pressure to adapt it. On the bounded saddle, I'm going to fill in proximal, palatal, and then on the other side, the other proximal, and once more squeeze it into place using finger pressure. So what happens is that this wax has now filled in the space between the angle of the wax and the cast. The third place we're going to add wax to are inside the beading line. We have on the cast, on the refractory cast, remember that we have a posterior beading line and an anterior beading line. This serves to create a seal in the metal between the tissue and the denture, the partial denture. So these beading lines, we are also going to fill them with this molten wax. So the wax added in the framework wax up, the wax added in the beading line will become like a post down area. So the wax is added in a thin layer in this posterior beading line. We're going to repeat the same process in the anterior beading line, and the anterior beading line is in between the rugi area. It's less clear than the posterior beading line on your cast. Okay, we're moving to the next step, but just to recapitulate on what we said that we need to draw. I have it here in drawing so you could know where we're adding the wax. So if I'm talking about the upper, I am creating what we call internal finish lines. This is our first step. I'm adding the wax proximal, palatal or lingual, reaching up to the hamular area around the relief wax. Okay, we had the gauged relief that we added on secondary cast, so we are now surrounding it with wax. The idea with this addition of wax is to fill in this angle. So there is an angle created between, it's 90 degrees, created by the relief, the gauged relief, and the original cast. So we're filling in this curve. This was the function of our addition. So, once more, proximal, palatal, and inside the box, inside the wax. For the lower, we don't have beading lines, so we're going to concentrate proximally, lingually, and then the other proximal side around the gauged relief, and as well we're filling in the boxes. For the beading line, we are extending our wax inside the beading line. We want to make sure that we have wax inside the beading line. And remember that the beading line does not touch the tooth. It's free from the marginal gingiva of around 5 to 6 millimeters. Beading lines do not extend to abutment teeth. So we're going to fill in the beading line, the posterior beading line, and the anterior beading line with wax. For the lower, we're going to do the same step, and you can find that we're going to fill in these layers here, lingual and proximal as well. Okay? 10 minutes to do this step. After finishing all internal finish lines, we're going to fill in the rests with molten wax to form the rests on metal framework. So what we have on the tooth is the rest preparations. So these are rest preparations. When we fill these with wax, we will have rest of the metal framework. So once more, we're going to bring our inlay wax. We're going to melt it down and drip inside the rests with sufficient amount of wax to form the rest, the rest in metal framework. So we spread it. We make sure it doesn't go out of the margins of our rest preparation. We don't want excess wax here, because later on we said that any wax we're adding is the wax that will become metal. So we just make it smooth, make sure that our additions are fused together. We have enough thickness and bulk. We have enough thickness and bulk in the margin of the teeth. Okay. We have enough thickness of wax in the neck area, and we have enough thickness in the rest area. We fuse the layers together and make them shiny into one piece. In the canine, we're going to make it in the rest seat. So we're going to add molten wax over the rest seat preparation, and anything gone beyond our rest seat that we prefer, we're going to scratch it away. Smooth the rest itself. We're going to smooth the rest itself. Okay. And we're going to wait for it to cool down before carving it into the new shape. And in free and saddles, we have the rest separated from the saddle area. It's not on the same side of the saddle area. So we're adding wax here. Melting it, fusing it to one piece, making sure we have enough thickness. We'll wait for this to cool down. We're going back to the one which was the canine. We added a bit in excess, so we just scratch away any excess wax. If we just don't remove it now, we will just increase the step of metal finishing. So it's just easier for us to scratch it away and make sure that the rest of the wax is. And another run with the hot instrument will remelt it and fuse all of the layers together to make them in one bulk. Nothing below, no wax below this, and no need of any wax above it. For the lower, now the step is finished. So once more, you can notice that our additions are on the canine rest. We have now enough bulk of material and it's smooth and shining. This is enough bulk for metal to be a rest. On the molar, we also have this enough thickness, and you can also see it more from the proximal side, where we have added enough wax into the rest preparation to fill in it. And make sure that the rest area is thick enough with metal. because later on we're going to finish, we will be finishing metal and polishing the metal, so we don't want it to be less. So we tried just to go back and make the marginal ridge continuous between the two cusps. Okay. For the premolar, which is a single rest, it's far away from the free end saddle. It's separated from the saddle. So we once more we add enough thickness and we make it run from the proximal surface into the embrasure in between teeth, not on the saddle area. Now we're ready to do our next step. The next step after this is adding minor connectors. We have multiple minor connectors and we're going to explain one by one. The first minor connector we're going to add will run from the rest and the free end saddle area downwards and meet the major connector. So once more we're going to take some of our inlay wax, melt it down and begin dripping it into location. So we add molten wax and we spread it vertically to run down from the rest. So we add molten wax and we spread it to meet with the rest. Now here it's pulling downwards, so it's wise just here to tilt the cast laterally and make sure that the pool of wax is equal, forming a body of a minor connector. So the wax, we run it in the same thickness to in the embrasure, we fill in the embrasure and we run up to the rest and we make sure we have enough thickness of metal in the rest neck area. Once more, once it cools down, we just can carve away any excess wax that run on the surfaces of the teeth that we don't want out of the embrasure area. So this is our minor connector added to the. Now these rests are close to the saddle area, and where our minor connectors will be coming from the saddle area upwards, meeting these rests. So they are different from these single rests. Okay. So how do we add them? These minor connectors also serve another function, which they are guide plates. They are in touch with the surface of the tooth that provide us with guidance. So what we're going to use? We're going to use gauge wax that has a specific gauge, and we're going to cut it in rectangles, small rectangles, and we're going to add these rectangles. So we have cut rectangles of gauged wax, and we adapt them to the surface of the tooth where the guide plate is present. So whatever is in wax now will become metal. So now it's called guide plate. The preparation on the tooth is called guide plane. So I brought a square piece of wax, and because this is the canine morphology is almost from the proximal surface like a triangle, I just put the corner of the gauged wax on the tooth. I fit it on the tooth, adapted it, and I'm going to remove any excess. We know that the guide plane preparation runs from palatal to buccal, and we're going to confine the wax added, which will become the guide plate, in the same area where this is added. So we brought a square of gauged relief. We adapted it to the canine because the canine is a triangle in cross section. We adapted it in an oblique manner. So we fit the tip here and we cut off the excess, and we're going to cut any excess from the palatal. And by the back of my instrument, my round instrument, I could just press on the wax to make sure that the corner is adapted very well. But this pressure is minor because I want to make sure and I want to ensure that the thickness of this plate has not changed. So this is the guide plate added. Any excess on the ridge area, I just remove it to make sure that here we have a smooth junction. between the guide plate and the next metal we will add. So this is the one added to the canine. But notice that this plate is separate from the rest. They have not been joined yet. So what do? By a heated instrument, I run over the junction in between them. I just run with my hot instrument over these junctions and use some of the molten wax to connect them together. This will form the neck area. So in the neck area between the rest wax, so the neck area between the rest and the guide plate should have sufficient thickness, and also once more they should go back and be smooth as if they are one piece. So I'm going to flow the wax towards the plate. This will make the thickness uniform and keep the shyness in between these connections. So now this rest is smoothly connected to the guide plate without any sharp angles, and from the lower part also I clean and make sure that the connections between them have no sharp angles. They are smooth and they flow with each other. Now on the molar side, I bring a square piece of wax, I adapt it to the surface. I use the back of the instrument to make sure that the corner is filled in with this material. I use the temperature to join between the rest and the new guide plate that I have. So the neck area, I'm flowing with the material from the rest towards the neck area to make sure that this area is thick. So the neck and the guide plate, the neck of the rest and the guide plate are joined together now in one piece. Notice that I did not ruin the shape of the plate itself. It's just connecting them together in one go. And then, using my cold tip of this instrument, I just cut the angles between these two parts now, the guide plate and the rest. I make sure that the junction between them is rounded and smooth. Any excess of wax going over the tooth or going over this side, I just remove it to make sure that the metal here will become in one piece with no excess flush that needs a lot of finishing procedure. Once more, what's over the gauged relief, I just cut it. I join the waxes at the internal finish line side. On the free end saddle, we're going to follow the same steps, but the main difference is that there are no rests to join them, because the rest is separated from the guide plate here, because this is the free end saddle morphology and the RPI system doesn't tolerate it. So the guide plate actually touches the tooth up to the marginal ridge. So this is the marginal ridge. So we're reaching the marginal ridge. We're adapting it buccally and lingually, where I'm using the corner of the instrument to make sure it's filling in the angle. Because if I did not do this movement and it's like flowing over the surface, what will actually happen that I'll not have a place to place, I'll not have space here to place my second tooth. So I want the metal clearly adapted to the corner, but I'm sure that it will not go to any undercut because these undercuts were blocked previously. Now with the cold end of my instrument, I just cut off the excess going on the saddle area. Don't want excess thickness of metal here. I adapt it very well and remove any excess from the buccal surface. Make this angles round and remove all wax going buccal to this point. Okay? So this is our guide plate in place over our internal finish line. This is the lower. It has the same features. You can notice that the rest is connected to the guide plate. This rest is connected to the guide plate with enough thickness, sufficient thickness. Here it's connected to the guide plate. Here also is connected to the guide plate. The guide plate does not exceed the buccal surface. This line angle does not exceed it, does not exceed this line angle. Lingual also doesn't exceed the lingual angle. And you have smooth surfaces between structures. And the lower minor connector goes down in the embrasure, fills in the embrasure. Okay, the next step we're going to do is adding the major connector. Okay? For the major connector, we have two shapes. We have the open lattice shape, okay? And we have the mesh shape. Mesh. Okay? These two, first of all, before adding them, we need to know their surfaces. We have a shiny surface and we have a bulging surface with the morphology on it. The shining surface is the one that goes on the tissue. Okay? The bulky, or the one that has the morphology in it, we put it on towards the teeth. Okay? So if I have this, you can see there is a shiny. Can you see it? It's shining on one side. Okay? There is a shine for it. On the other side, it has the morphology of the metal. So we're going to add this, we're going to let you add this in the free and saddle area. Now, in the free and saddle areas, usually, the main indication, we have the choice between mesh and open lattice. Open lattice is better because in terms of acrylic quality, the acrylic goes more in between these holes and holds to the acryl beneath it. So it's better. But sometimes we don't have, if I add it, I sometimes might not have enough bulk to, enough space, interocclusal space with the upper teeth, and I could not set teeth if it was thick, okay? So the only thing that makes me shift from the open lattice to the mesh area is where we don't have interocclusal space, sufficient interocclusal space, okay? And this usually happens in the upper. This problem usually happens in the upper, okay? But for today, we're going to do for the upper and the lower. In the free and saddle area, we're going to place the open lattice. In the bounded saddle area, we're going to place the mesh design, okay? So this is the open lattice design. The shiny surface is down towards the tissue, and I'm going to place it on the free and saddle area, okay? So simply, I make sure before adding it that the wax in the stopper area is not bulky. And I begin from the guide plane backwards. Okay? So this is my first addition. Simply, I touch the guide plane. I should be touching the guide plane. Okay? So I'm going to place it, touching the guide plane. Now, and the cast that you have, you might notice that the wax is not easily attaching to the cast. But in the refractory cast, the true refractory cast, it is usually dipped in beeswax to make it a bit stronger on the surface. And the beeswax is a little bit tacky. It's sticky. Okay? So when I place the wax, metal frame wax up on the refractory cast, it will stick by the effect of the beeswax, okay? So in this case, in our case, sometimes it does not stick sufficiently. So make sure when you press it very lightly without changing the morphology of the grids on the surface, okay? We also could join this. Now, after adding it, we must notice, first of all, that we don't extend metal over the tuberosity. So any metal on the tuberosity, we're going to remove it. Okay, I'm going to cut it away. So the metal extends from the guide plane over the stopper till the beginning of the tuberosity, more mesial. I need to cut a bit more in my case. Now, to add it, to make sure it's secure in its place, we're going to melt down the wax between it and the guide plate. So the wax here, close to the guide plate, I'm going to melt it down and join it with the guide plate. Okay? I'm also going to join it with the stopper in the stopper area. So I'm going to melt down the stopper area and fuse some of the wax molten with the metal frame here. So the wax has molten from inside the box. If I need a new drop of wax, I'm going to add it. And join the metal framework with the stopper beneath it. Okay? So these are the areas now joined. For the upper, because the ridge is a bit wide, I could add another piece of the wax, slightly buccal, and another small piece, slightly lingual. Okay? Because we have enough bulk in the upper. And I'm going to cut it in an oblique way here, and I'm going to cut it in an oblique way here, away from the tuberosity area. For the bounded saddle area on the upper and on the lower, in your case, we're going to place the mesh. Once more, the shining surface is downwards towards the tissue, and the other non-shining surface is upwards. Okay? I place it over the guide plane first, and then determine what I'm going to cut. I try to press it in a small amount of force. Then we're going to melt down the edges of this and join it with the guide plates on both sides. It should be joined with the guide plate. So a piece of wax, drop, added between the metal and the guide plate on this side, and we're going to repeat it on the other side. Try not to use the wax from the guide plate itself, because if I melt down that wax, it will become thinner. So try to add new wax from outside. A drop of wax and spread it between the guide plate and the mesh area. Okay? Once it's secure in place, I'm going to cut off the excess. I'm going to cut off any part of the mesh area away from the relief, Do you remember that we said that the relief wax is like a rectangle? So we're cutting the major connector lingually or palatally over this area. Okay? So we're only extending it to the external finish line. Because over it we will do, the internal finish line. So we're reaching with the mesh area up to the internal finish line. Over it we were going to place another thing called external finish lines. We're going to tell you about them in a moment. And we're also making them round from the buccal surface. And we're going to repeat the same procedure for the lower in a moment, okay? Now for the lower, we're going to add the open lattice on the free and saddle area. Once more, we're going to reach the guide plate. Now its name is guide plate because it's on the in the metal. And I'm going to join them together by a drop of wax, external drop of wax. And I'm also going to join it to the stopper using another drop of wax over the stopper area. And of course, anything extending to the retromolar pad area, we're going to remove it. So it does not extend over the retromolar pad area. We're going to add the open lattice to the saddle area. Once more, the shining surface is down. I'm looking for the shining surface. And the one that has the pattern is upwards. I'm going to estimate the length that I need to add. The length should extend from the guide plate to the guide plate. And the width is over the relief area. Adapting it not with firm pressure, just light pressure, because any pressure on the wax will change its shape. I don't want to change the shape of the wax, so I only apply a small amount of pressure. I'm bringing an external drop of wax to join the mesh with the guide plate. So it's joined here. It's also joined on the other side. So once they are now fused together as one piece, I'm going to remove the excess outside the relief area. I'm removing the angles, actually. And I'm following the outline of the relief area beneath it. So these are the major connectors. The base, the acrylic base area is now ready, and for this step you can take 10 to 15 minutes. Now the step we're going to do is adding what we call an external finish line. Okay? Remember that we are going to add acrylic over the metal later on. I'm going to add acrylic because I want to put in teeth over here. Okay? Now this acrylic should join the metal in an angle. It should not flow over the metal in a flush, because acrylic generally does not adhere to metal. Okay? So if I want to make it as a flush, the thin areas or sharp areas of acrylic over the metal will break. So I need to make what we call an external finish line. The external finish line is part of the metal, not the acrylic. Okay? It's a structure inside the metal. So how did we make the internal finish line in the metal? It's already done by the relief wax. Do you remember the relief wax? Okay? When we placed the relief wax, we have placed the wax over the ridge, overlapping the ridge and going more palatal, away from the marginal gingiva of the new teeth. Remember that I'm going to add a new teeth here. I'm going to add a tooth here, I'm going to add a tooth here, I'm going to add a tooth here. The new teeth will have what we call like the marginal gingiva, the same morphology of the marginal gingiva. So the first layer we added with the relief, we extended it like 4, 5, 6 millimeters beyond the marginal ridge, okay? The marginal, on the marginal ridge, sorry, over the marginal gingiva, where it's supposed to be. So if I'm going to add teeth here, they will almost be placed in this location, okay? So the idea is to imagine where will be the teeth added. So this is the marginal gingiva of the natural tooth. When I'm going to add another tooth, I'm going to add the marginal gingiva here, marginal gingiva here, and so on. And remember that we make marginal gingiva using acrylic. Okay? So it's not only the tooth placed, we have also acrylic extending. Okay? So if I imagine, if I draw a line from the marginal gingiva of the tooth here, posteriorly, imagining where the molar marginal gingiva will be, the relief wax, the first layer of relief wax placed on the secondary was around 5, let's say 6 millimeters beyond this marginal ridge or marginal gingiva. Now if I want to place an external finish line, my external finish line will be the area of contact with metal with acrylic. So my external finish line, first of all, it's not over the relief immediately, it's over the metal framework. Okay? So it's placed over the metal framework. It's a piece of wax. It's in shape of a roll, okay, or a rod. It's a piece of wax, also pattern wax. I'm going to place this in where I'm imagining, or giving imagination where the marginal gingiva will be. Okay, so I'm going to just demonstrate it here just to show you the idea. Because here I've drawn the marginal gingiva, where the teeth will be. Now the external finish line will be in a location between the internal finish line and the marginal gingiva of teeth. Okay? Why? Because acrylic will come in. I need enough thickness of acrylic to form this marginal gingiva. So did you understand the idea? Okay, once more. Because this cast I could draw on it, I'm going to draw it first here. I placed where the marginal gingiva of the teeth I'm adding. Almost they will be around here. The external finish line should be in a line in between the internal finish line and the marginal gingiva of teeth. But I don't place it on the cast like this. I place it over the metal framework. Okay? So, if I'm going to first imagine where will be the marginal gingiva of these teeth, okay, the marginal gingiva of the artificial teeth added here will be somewhere like this. This is the marginal gingiva of this tooth, and this is the marginal gingiva of this tooth. They will be almost like this, in between here. Okay? So these are the new teeth that I'm going to add. Now my external finish line should be between this line and the internal finish line. So it's more occlusal than the internal finish line. This is where I'm going to add it. So I'm going to shape my wax. I'm going to bring the wax, shape it like a square, almost like a square, and place it in the line we said that we're going to be. So if the marginal gingiva of the teeth I'm adding are around here, I have some space between the marginal gingiva and the external finish line. Okay? I'm going to add it first as a roll, a line. So I preserved the roll of the wax. And then on the tooth area, around the tooth area, I'm going to bend it vertically. So it goes up in an angle. It will join with the guide plate palatal. Okay?
So I'm going to show it in a moment. When I fix it in place, I'm going to show it to you in a moment. So this is how I add it first. So I'm just adapting it. So once more, if I just revise the shape here, if you can see it on a close-up. Okay. Try to focus it. Okay, once more. I have the internal finish line here. The teeth I'm going to add will have, they need enough bulk for their lingual cusps or palatal cusps here. So the line where the teeth will be added and the internal finish line, in between I place my external finish line. Okay? I bend it vertically and I joined it with the palatal surface of the guide plate here, and I joined it with the palatal surface of the guide plate on the other side. This is for the banded saddle area. For the free and saddle area, I'm going to repeat the idea that this is the internal finish line. Okay? This is the internal finish line over here. And these are the marginal gingiva of the teeth added. When I'm going to place teeth, they will have marginal gingiva. They will be somewhere around here. So in between them, in between these two lines, I place my wax. So it will be somewhere in the middle here. So I place it over my framework. I'm going to do the vertical angle. I'm over the metal framework. And I'm on the palatal surface of the guide plate, running down. So this is my external finish line added here. Okay. Okay, just for the clarity of the voice, I'm going to repeat it. So it's running down vertically from the palatal surface of the guide plate with an angle clearing the place for the new tooth to be added. So I have enough bulk for the new tooth to be added. I'm going down palatally over the metal. I'm still over the metal added. I'm not away from it, but I am more occlusal than the internal finish line. So this is my wax added. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to adapt it slightly with my finger and just melt down the external surface of it. Okay? Melt down the external surface of it. I'm going to cut off the excess of the material. So I cut off the excess. It's running down in an angle. I'm going to add wax rather than melting it down. If I melt this down, I will lose the external finish line. So I don't melt it down. Actually what I do, I add drops of new wax, joining the internal finish line with the external finish line in an oblique manner. Okay? In an oblique manner. So once more, using the inlay wax that you have, I'm going to hold a drop of wax, a molten drop of wax.
الفيديو عنا بس ايدك اللي طالعه والصوت مش واضح عنا.
Okay.
ممكن تفضل.
I'm going to repeat it. Okay, you can see that I'm dripping the wax, new wax. I'm adding a new wax in between the external finish line and the internal finish line. They should be in a wedge shape. I'm trying not to melt down the external finish line I added. The wax you added is very delicate and it's very small, so I try to not melt it down.
I'm just adding to it on the external side of it, joining it with the external finish, the internal finish line. So now you can see, if you look closely here, you can see that there is a wedge. Okay, there is a wedge of wax added between the external finish line and the internal finish line. I added wax. I preserved the step that the external wax creates. There is a step now on the inner side of the metal. Okay? At the guide plate area here, in the guide plate area here, I'm going to also join them together, not adding wax, just fusing the occlusal part of the external finish line with the guide plate I have and with the mesh area that I have. Okay? And that's the external line finished for the upper. I'm going to repeat the same thing on the other side, on the free inserted side. So what am I going to do? I'm going to bring the external wax and drip it in between the external finish line and the internal finish line and fill the space with a wedge shape. Now for the lower, you need an extra step before you do the finish lines. On the bounded saddle area, it's easy. It's the same procedure we've done in on the upper. So I'm going to bring up a piece of wax. Okay, this is the lower bounded saddle area. I'm going to place the piece of wax away from the internal finish line, but in the same time leaving space for the new teeth to be added in. يا علا تمسكين المايك. Okay, once more, for the bounded saddle area, I'm going to place the wax running down from the guide plate, the lingual surface of the guide plate, okay? Running down from the lingual surface of the guide plate over the mesh area. Then, with an angle, I'm going back parallel to the ridge. But if I'm looking lingually, I'm away from the internal finish line, okay? If I'm looking at it lingually, this is the internal finish line and this is my external finish line. So they are separate from each other, but in the same time I'm leaving enough width for the teeth to be added. Now going to the canine area, I'm going to add in and remove the excess. So it's like a rectangle. If I look at it closely once more, this is the internal finish line down here, okay? This is the width of the teeth that I need for the teeth to be added. So it's in between the marginal gingiva of the teeth and the internal finish line, and it runs vertically to meet the guide plate from the lingual side of both sides. Okay? This is easy for the bounded saddle. It's similar to the upper. But for the freehand saddle area, the finish line is vertical. Okay? If we see an old model like this one, the external finish line is a vertical line like this, going up to the tooth. Okay? From the major connector up to the tooth. So how am I going to add this? I'm going to first add a triangle of wax. Okay? I'm going to add a triangle of wax from the relief wax, and then over it I'm going to do my external finish line. So if this was the lower now, Okay? I'm going to cut a triangle of the relief wax, the gauged wax that we have. A small triangle. And this triangle will extend from the major connector, which is the, from the major connector here, the lingual bar that we will add at the last step, and up to the open lattice area. Okay, see this triangle? This triangle will strengthen the junction between the major connector and the open lattice area. So after adding this triangle internally, we're going to add in simply a piece of wax over this. Now this piece of wax should be away from the internal finish line. So you can see through the wax now because it is clear. You can see the internal finish line over here. Can you see it? Through the wax. I could see it through the wax. So I'm going to make this external finish line either more anterior or more posterior to this line. We prefer, because we want to add teeth in, we're going to make it closer to the anterior area. So it will be a line anteriorly. So I'm going to add this piece of external finish line. I'm going to extend it over the triangle that I added up to the lingual surface. So because the wax is clear, I'll show it to you in a moment, how the external finish line is away from the internal finish line. They don't meet together. And I'm going to remove the excess wax. And this is it now added. So you can see that the external finish line runs in a line parallel to the internal finish line, but more anterior to it. Okay? And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to add wax from this side to join the two together. So a drop of external wax, it's not the same wax, is added to join them together. Now the extension lingually of this finish line should not reach the full sulcus depth, because in metal we avoid reaching the full sulcus depth, so the patient will have some freedom to move the floor of the mouth with his tongue. So this is the external finish line now added to the free incisor area. This is how we add it. Okay, you are free to begin work. 15 minutes for this one.
Is this correct? This one?
Yes.
So just to extend the wax from
Now
under
you're
it.
going to do, yes, you're going to add wax, a drop of wax, beneath it, and join it with the internal finish line.
Oh, okay.
Melt everything beneath it.
Is the one correct?
Just 1 moment. I'm just to do this. Try not to touch the rod itself. Okay. Clear enough to add a tooth. See, I have clearance. I'm going to add it here. Here they don't meet. I have enough thickness for the new tooth to be added. This goes up to. Now what are we going to do now? Just add, as I told you, molten wax and blend them together. This one, no, I need more. No, this triangle is not here. Okay, I have two questions here that I want to concentrate on before I move to the next step. The first question was, what is the relation of the external finish line with the guide plate? Okay, the external finish line with the guide plate. When I place this wax, this blue wax, I extend it up to the palatal surface of the guide plate. Okay, when I added the wax to blend the external finish line with the wax present, I added it from the outer side or the palatal side, but in the guide plate area, there should be a step. So if I am touching the guide plate to the external finish line, I feel a step here. Okay? There is a step also here. I feel a step also here. So the step is not only horizontally running with the ridge, it's also present vertically, running on the palatal or lingual surface of the guide plate. Okay? So the external finish line ends on the palatal surface or the palatal side of the guide plate up to the last occlusal part of the guide plate. So there is a step running from here up to here. Okay? The second question was, do I end my finish line short from the tuberosity? The answer is no. We need to extend the external finish line up to the hamular area. And it should be straight. So this is the free saddle area. So if we're looking at the free saddle area, the external finish line or the step begins, we said, from the proximal plate, the guide plate here, running down vertically, and then it runs horizontally parallel to the ridge, reaching up to the point of the hamular area, because the metal will extend here. The metal palatally extends to the hamular area, but over the ridge and buccally they do not extend. Okay? That was the second question. The third question was, what is the relation of the external finish line with the minor connector of the wrist? Here we have two options. We're going to place them close to each other. We have two options. If I'm going to go down from the wrist downwards with a minor connector and want to keep them separate, I should have a clearance between them 5 millimeters in between this component and this component. So the finish line does not extend to the minor connector. Okay? This is the case if I want to make them separate. I have another option if the space is not enough, and I have another option where I join them in a plate. Okay? In a plate design. So you can see that this is the external finish line. You no longer see it because it's now blended with the minor connector that came down from here. And they all go up to the survey line on the tooth here. So it's now in the shape of a plate. I have the external finish line over here. I could see, in my case, I could see it. So I have an external finish line over here. Okay? So it's now the anterior edge of this finish line is joined together with the minor connector in the form of a plate. Okay? So I have these two options. So either this one joined in the external finish line my minor connector, or I have this one where they are kept separate from each other. And I need to observe that we have a vertical clearance between these two components around 5 millimeters. Okay? Away from the internal finish line, but at the same time leaving space for the new teeth to be added in. يا لا تمسكين المايك. Okay, once more, for the bounded saddle area, I'm going to place the wax running down from the guide plate, the lingual surface of the guide plate, okay? Running down from the lingual surface of the guide plate over the mesh area. Then, with an angle, I'm going back parallel to the ridge. But if I'm looking lingually, I'm away from the internal finish line, okay? If I'm looking at it lingually, this is the internal finish line and this is my external finish line. So they are separate from each other, but in the same time I'm leaving enough width for the teeth to be added. Now going to the canine area, I'm going to add in and remove the excess. So it's like a rectangle. If I look at it closely once more, this is the internal finish line down here. Okay? This is the width of the teeth that I need for the teeth to be added. So it's in between the marginal gingiva of the teeth and the internal finish line. And it runs vertically to meet the guide plate from the lingual side of both sides. Okay? This is easy for the bounded saddle. It's similar to the upper. But for the free saddle area, the finish line is vertical. Okay? If we see an old model like this one, the external finish line is a vertical line like this, going up to the tooth. Okay? From the major connector up to the tooth. So how am I going to add this? I'm going to first add a triangle of wax. Okay? I'm going to add a triangle of wax from the relief wax, and then over it I'm going to do my external finish line. So if this was the lower now, okay, I'm going to cut a triangle of the relief wax, the gauged wax that we have. A small triangle, and this triangle will extend from the major connector, which is the from the major connector here, the lingual bar that we will add at the last step, and up to the open lattice area. Okay, see this triangle? This will strengthen. This triangle will strengthen the junction between the major connector and the open lattice area. So after adding this triangle internally, we're going to add in simply a piece of wax over this. Now this piece of wax should be away from the internal finish line. So you can see through the wax now because it is clear. You can see the internal finish line over here. Can you see it? Through the wax. I could see it through the wax. So I'm going to make this external finish line either more anterior or more posterior to this line. We prefer, because we want to add teeth in, we're going to make it closer to the anterior area. So it will be aligned anteriorly. So I'm going to add this piece of external finish line. I'm going to extend it over the triangle that I added up to the lingual surface. So because the wax is clear, I'll show it to you in a moment, how the external finish line is away from the internal finish line. They don't meet together. And I'm going to remove the excess wax. And this is it now added. So you can see that the external finish line runs in a line parallel to the internal finish line, but more anterior to it. Okay? And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to add wax from this side to join the two together. So a drop of external wax, it's not the same wax, is added to join them together. Now the extension lingually of this finish line should not reach the full sulcus depth, because in metal we avoid reaching the full sulcus depth, so the patient will have some freedom to move the floor of the mouth with his tongue. So this is the external finish line now added to the free and saddle area. This is how we add it. Okay, you are free to begin work. 15 minutes for this one.
Is this correct? This one?
Yes.
So just extend the lower
Now you're going to do, yes, you're going to add wax, a drop of wax, beneath it, and join it with the internal finish line.
Okay.
Melt everything beneath it. Just one moment. And just to do this. Try not to touch the rod itself. Clear enough to add it with. See, I have clearance. I'm going to add it here. Here they don't meet. I have enough thickness for the new tube to be added. This goes up to. Now what are we going to do now? Just add, as I told you, molten wax and blend them together. This one, no, need more. No, this triangle is not here. Now in this step, we're going to move into adding the major connector. Okay, we've added most of the components now. We are left with the major connector and the clasps. We leave the clasps usually till the last step. We're going to now add the major connector. We're going to begin with the upper. Our major connector that we chose for the upper will be complete palatal coverage. And for this, I'm going to use wax pattern that has the shape of the palette. Okay, it comes in, it's a gauged wax. It has a specific gauge, it has specific dimensions. But not only that, it also has you can see when it's shining, it's a bit rough on one side. This is to mimic the roughness naturally present in the palette. The palette is not totally smooth. It has some structure to it, okay? Surface structure, and this is mimicked here. So we have a rough surface, you can see it when it's shining, it's a rough surface, and we have a shining surface. Okay? The shining surface is the one that is fit on the palate of the patient. This one we leave it upwards. So I'm going to now adapt this on the palate. Once more, as all pattern waxes, when I'm adapting, I don't press a lot. I'm just finely trying to adapt it to place. If I feel it's rigid, I don't press more. If I press more, I change the thickness of this wax. It complies to my pressure. So if I feel that it's a bit stiff and it's not adapting to the cast well, I run it far away from the flame just to give it some warmth. And I'm heating it slightly with the flame. And now it's more pliable, so I could adapt it by my finger, making sure that I don't press and ruin the thickness of it. Okay? When I'm adapting, I usually begin from the middle, outside, to the outside. Okay? From the middle to the outside. Okay? Also try to eliminate any folds in it. I'm adapting it to the palette. And now how do I cut it? Here I have on the frilled saddle, I have the same choice that I had in the lower. I either can make them separate, or if I'm going to make them separate, the minor connector is separate from the guide plate. If these are separate, I'm going to cut an arch away from the gingiva, clearing it for 6 millimeters, somewhere like this. I'm going to cut it like this. If I want to make it a plate, I'm going to cut on the survey line here. So I'm going to do both, but I'm going to begin with the plate. So if I'm cutting a plate, I'm going over the palatal surface of the cusp, over the survey line. I'm reaching the survey line, not more. Then I'm reaching now the external finish line. When I cut on the external finish line, simply I cut vertically, using my step on the finish line as my guide. So I have used the finish line itself as a guide where I place my knife. So my knife is vertical on the finish line. Okay? And I try to separate the two pieces from each other. When I expose the finish line now, I'm going to cut it. Now when I expose the finish line, I will find that my wax, the major connector, is over the wedge we created, and it's reaching to the external finish line in a vertical action. And I accentuate the step by running the wax knife or the lacquer carver over this and pressing them together. So now the major connector is now connected with the finish line. And I also make sure it's the same here. I'm using my external finish line to tell me where to cut the wax, and I'm not ruining the external finish line using the cut. Now the external finish line is going down from the guide plate, down, and joined together with the major connector well. Okay, so the step is now running over here, but it's covered by the major connector. In the beading line area, so let's say on the tuberosity area, the major connector does not go over the tuberosity. It reaches up to the hamular notch area. And we're leaving a triangle entering into the hamular notch area. Now the bead line. You can see that the wax, you can see through it. So where am I going to cut in the beading line? Put more posterior to it. So the beading line is now under the major connector. And I'm reaching the second abutment. Okay? So when I separate these, now you can clearly see the beading line is beneath the major connector. Okay? I don't cut anterior to it, I cut posterior to it. So now they are included together, and I could bevel them slightly. Now, on the bounded saddle area, once more, I'm going to use the external finish line as the guide for my cut. So I'm cutting over the external finish line. Separating the pieces. So when I adapted it like this, as you can see, I could see the external finish line. So for an internal line to this external finish line, I'm cutting. And once I separate these two pieces, I could see the external finish line here. Okay, once more on this side. What is the external line going like? Now I have the major connector joining the external finish line at the edge. Wherever the external finish line is covered by the major connector, I remove it. And now the step is back. The step of the external finish line is back. It's extending from the tube downwards and going once more vertically up to the guide plate of the canine. Okay? So it's all present there. Now over the canine, once more, we have the choice to make it as a plate. And this will be our cut. Or we can make them, okay? I have two choices on the canine. I could have a coverage by a plate. Okay, this is option number one. And notice that the major connector here over the canine area, it runs over the canine area and over the cingulum. That means if I'm looking at this from the internal side, I should see the cingulum in the major connector if I'm using a plate. Okay? The other option is that I could leave the rest as an arm running from the guide plate and expose this area. And this is the second option. Okay? So the rest is joined to the guide plate, not to the major connector. So the rest is connected here, not connected downwards. This is more hygienic as a choice for this case. Okay? I'm trying to remove any folds, making sure everything is smooth. And here I'm running back to the premolar. Once more, if I'm looking at the beading line now is under the major connector, not separate from it. Okay? Now on this side I have two options as well. So once more, I have the option to cover the canine with the major connector, and this will form a plate, or I can expose it, making sure that the rest is well connected to the guide plate, not to the major connector. Okay? On this side, I have the two options as well. I could join the minor connector with the guide plate with a plate on the tooth. Okay, this is option number one. I could free them. If I want them separate and I want to expose this marginal gingiva to be more hygienic, I can run down. I could run down in an arch form, exposing how many millimeters? 6 millimeters in the upper. So I exposed this vertically by 6 millimeters, and horizontally, the two vertical components have more than 5 millimeters separating them. This is more hygienic to this tooth. Okay? If this tooth doesn't need the support and periodontally is sound and everything is okay, then no periodontal disease, no problem with the bone support, I could separate the two components from each other. So we have the two options, either a plate, okay, reaching the survey line on the abutment teeth, or the clearance way where we are exposing 6 millimeters and vertically connecting it. Now adding in the major connector for the lower is a bit more complicated. You want to notice, as in the upper, remember that we said the upper has a shining surface and irregular surface, and we said the irregular surface or the rough surface goes upwards. In the lower, we need to know the surfaces of the lingual bar, sorry. We're not going to place a plate here today. We're going to place a lingual bar. And this is one good thing about metal. You don't need in the metal the full thickness of a plate, as in acrylic. Remember, temporary acrylic, the only major connector in the lower should be a plate for the acrylic. In the metal, I could place smaller components as a lingual bar. Now, the lingual bar, look at the cross-section of this. Okay? If I were to draw it here, for you to see it better, okay? The cross-section of the lingual bar would be like a pear shape, okay? It's like a pear shape. On one side, it's flat, okay? The other side, it's rounded, okay? So on one side, here, it's flat. The other side is rounded. It has another feature. It has a thick area and a thin area. The thick area should be downwards. The thin area should be occlusally. Okay? So once more, it has two sides, flat and rounded, and it has an upper and lower edge. One is more round than the upper. The upper is more tapered. So this is how we orient this on the cast. So make sure you see your cross-section of your major connector and notice it before you place it on the cast. Now where am I going to extend my lingual bar on the lower? If this is the lower, so the thick margin is downwards, the thick is down, the thin is up, the flat is on the tissue, okay? The shining flat surface is on the tissue. And I begin by adding it beneath my external finish line. So it's beneath the external finish line. I run down on the other side. I run to the other side. How much do I keep it away from the marginal gingiva? 4 millimeters from the marginal gingiva, the upper edge of it. Okay. And then I cut it, I stop it at the external finish line here. So, and the bounded area finish line, it extends along the whole length of the finish line, external finish line of the bounded saddle area. Okay? Adapt it lingually. It stops at the external finish line at the frame saddle area. So this is the morphology of it, okay? Once more, it extends from the bounded saddle area. I'm going to cut also the excess. It runs with the external finish line on the bounded saddle area. It runs along it. Okay, it runs along the external finish line up to the last part of the bounded saddle area. Up to the last part of the bounded saddle area. It runs beneath the external finish line, It's not in the full sulcus depth, it's away from the full sulcus depth. On the anterior part, it's 4 millimeters away from the marginal gingiva of teeth. Okay? And it runs to the other side up to the external finish line. It stops here. Here in the free saddle, the whole sulcus area will be filled in with acrylic. That's why it ends here. Now what is left for me is to join the lingual bar with the other components just by melting, making sure I don't have steps between the components. Simply, I'm melting down the junctions between the new wax and the old wax. Okay? Just enough to make them smooth. I don't ruin the shape of the wax while working like this. And in the anterior part, I don't do anything. I just adapt it to the cast very well. And here, I have the same two options we said. Either we cover this with a plate and we join it with the lingual bar, or we simply just join these components together with the lingual bar. Okay? So we preserve the lingual bar shape all throughout the length of it. So once we finish, we have the following smooth surfaces. You can see that I have smooth surfaces between the external finish line and then the edge of the lingual bar. Here it's well adapted to the marginal gingiva. And on this side, you find it blending well. All wax parts are blended smoothly. الاجتماع. طيب بس خليني احكي دقيقه. الدكتوره حنان خليها تيجي تضيف لك رسمات. قولي لها. Up, the flat is on the tissue. Okay? The shining flat surface is on the tissue. And I begin by adding it beneath my external finish line. So it's beneath the external finish line. I run down on the other side. I run to the other side. How much do I keep it away from the marginal gingiva? 4 millimeters from the marginal gingiva, the upper edge of it. Okay? And then I cut it, I stop it at the external finish line here. So, and the bounded area finish line, it extends along the whole length of the finish line, external finish line of the bounded saddle area. Okay? Adapted lingually. It stops at the external finish line at the free saddle area. So this is the morphology of it. Okay? Once more, it extends from the bounded saddle area. I'm going to cut also the excess. It runs with the external finish line on the bounded saddle area. It runs along it. Okay, it runs along the external finish line up to the last part of the bounded saddle area. Up to the last part of the bounded saddle area. It runs beneath the external finish line. It's not in the full sulcus depth. It's away from the full sulcus depth. On the anterior part, it's 4 millimeters away from the marginal gingiva of teeth. Okay? And it runs to the other side up to the external finish line. It stops here. Here in the free saddle, the whole sulcus area will be filled in with acrylic. That's why it ends here. Now what is left for me is to join the lingual bar with the other components just by melting, making sure I don't have steps between the components. Simply, I'm melting down the junctions between the new wax and the old wax. Okay? Just enough to make them smooth. I don't ruin the shape of the wax while working like this. And in the anterior part, I don't do anything. I just adapt it to the cast very well. And here, I have the same two options we said. Either we cover this with a plate and we join it with the lingual bar, or we simply just join these components together with the lingual bar. Okay? So we preserve the lingual bar shape all throughout the length of it. So once we finish, we have the following smooth surfaces. You can see that I have smooth surfaces between the external finish line and then the edge of the lingual bar. Here it's well adapted to the marginal gingiva. And on this side, you find it blending well. All wax parts are blended smoothly.
الاجتماع. طيب بس خليني احكي دقيقه. الدكتوره حنان خليها تيجي تضيف لك كلاستات. قولي لها.
Continue with the clasp wax up. Here we have two types of the clasp. We have the occlusal approaching clasp. This is one type of the occlusal approaching clasp, which is the circumferential clasp. And we have the hyper clasp, which is a gingivally approaching clasp. Now, starting with the circumferential clasp. In this wax pattern, we have two arms. One, the short one, which is the reciprocating arm, and the longer one, which is the retentive arm. Here we have two surfaces. There's a smooth surface or a flat surface and a round surface. The flat surface should be adapted on the cast, while the other is just up. Now, for placing this wax pattern on the cast, we should cut this piece here. This is the reciprocal arm, and this is the retentive arm. Now, we have to adapt it on the cast, actually originating from the, it should be originated from the wrist and going around the tooth, just resting on the ledge that is created on the cast. Now, to seal the circumferential clasp, we start with the adaptation of the retentive arm. We have to adapt this tip here. This is the retentive tip. We have to adapt it well on the tooth. Here, this is the molar. We have to adapt it well. So the retentive arm will just rest above or on the ledge that is created on the refractory cast. Don't press that much, so not to lose the shape of the clasp. Now we cut the excess here. We can seal it using the inlay wax, so to keep the clasp in its place. This way. So this is the arm, the retentive arm, which is just originated from this minor connector, which is the proximal plate here. Now, to the other clasp arm, which is the reciprocating arm, this should be adapted on the lingual surface or the palatal surface of the tooth, just resting on the ledge. Again and again, don't press that much, so not to lose the shape of the clasp and keep its morphology. And just cut any excess. You can use the inlay wax to seal it with the proximal plate. This way. Okay? Now, this is our circumferential clasp. It is a closely approaching clasp with having a retentive arm and a reciprocating arm. Now, going to the other type of the clasp, which is the hyper. Here is the hyper wax pattern. We just cut one of this hyper here, and we have to seal it with the minor connector, which is the grid work. Here, this is the open lattice grid work. Minor connector. Okay, again, we have two surfaces of this I-bar wax pattern. We have the flat one, which should be adapted on the cast. Here, this clasp should originate from the this minor connector grid work. This is the open lattice. We should cut any excess. Okay, now it should be just coming from the minor connector, from the open lattice downward to the sulcus, just away from the sulcus, not impinging the tissue, going upward toward the open window that is created on the refractory cast. It should rest on the open window. So the distance between this tip, retentive tip of the eye-bar and the marginal gingiva should be 3 millimeter, while the distance between the marginal gingiva to the bend should be around 5 millimeter. So the whole distance from the tip down to the bend should be around 8 millimeter. Should be adapted well on the cast. This way. Again, don't press that much so not to lose the form or the thickness of the wax. Here, once the eye-bar originated from the this open lattice here, to prevent any bending of this eye-bar or fracturing, we have to increase the thickness here. So we have to increase the thickness of the wax. Just melt another piece of the wax and make it in a triangular shape. This way. So increasing the thickness, at the same time keeping the shape of the clasp in a flat shape, not impinging or causing any bulgy on the clasp. Okay, this in this way. So here is our eye-bar clasp. It's originated from the minor connector here, the grid work, which is the open lattice here, and going downward to the sulcus. Once reaching the tooth, it's going upward toward the open window. The distance here should be about around 3 millimeter to the gingiva, and from the gingiva down to the bend should be 5 millimeter. So the whole distance should be what? Should be around 8 millimeter. In this way.
Now the final additions that we're going to add to the wax, we're going to add it from outside. Why? Because when I want to fuse and blend the components together, I don't want to change the lingual bar shape. The lingual bar, if I melt it down, it will change the dimensions of it, and I don't want that. So what actually I do is I begin adding wax from outside, blending the components together by a drop of wax in between. So I try to add, not melt down. Okay? Okay, so I'm trying to add wax, so a drop of wax is added. A drop of wax is added, and then I blend it vertically with the vertical components and blend it downwards, and making sure that I don't ruin the shape of my components that I have. Okay, so my external finish line is still here, and I have added this piece of wax to smoothen the components together. So I blend them on this side like this. Okay. The other area that I want to add to is the area beneath this cingulum of the canine. Also, I can add wax in drops, or if I have some excess of the green gauged major connector, I could simply use it. So if I have some excess of wax, I just cut it in a rectangle shape. Okay. Double it because I want some thickness here, and add it behind. I'm adding it behind my finish line. Okay. So I'm making enough thickness of wax to make me a plate. I cut the excess of the canine. I also bevel the part joining the major connector. And notice that the junction with the major connector is a curve. I'm trying to remove the excess here. Okay. And notice that now I have the plate over the cingulum. I clear the occlusal plates. It goes down vertically on the proximal surface of the canine, and then once it joins the lingual bar, it joins in an angle. Okay? Why do I need it to join in an angle? This will help the metal flow into the plate easily. After I've added, I feel there is like a step here, so I bevel the step over the canine. I don't leave it as a step. So I bevel it down. I blend, also bevel the part joining the lingual bar, so I bevel it as well, like a bevel. And then the final work, I make it all smooth and blended together by using a hot instrument